how did homelessness become your passion?
At the root of it was just helping people.
You have a reputation of stirring stuff up.
Being honest and putting out what's really happening on our streets.
What is the public not seeing?
There's very few real solutions being implemented and a lot of Band-Aids. We see encampments everywhere. We see homeless people everywhere. Well, they're in your neighborhoods because the mayor wants to clear out people from downtown.
You often say it's a whack-a-mole policy.
That's actually a term the police taught me.
The police said that?
Yeah. We are nowhere closer to reducing or figuring out how to work on homelessness. In fact, I think we're further away than when I started working on this 14, 15 years ago. I'd be dead if our healthcare system worked like our homelessness system. Unfortunately, our inability to get our shit together has cost a lot of lives.
Our work has never been more important than it is today. We need you. Please visit invisiblepeople.tv/donate. Michael McConnell is a business owner who has decided to take on the cause of homelessness. As an outsider and someone who has managed and ran successful businesses, he sees homelessness different than others. And because he is not dependent on funding from the homeless sector, he can be brutally honest. This is an amazing podcast. While I was waiting for you in the lobby, a mutual friend was standing there and we started talking. She asked, what are you doing? I said, I'm waiting for Michael. And first words out of her mouth was, is he still stirring stuff up? So you have a reputation of stirring stuff up. Want to explain that?
Well, I think I just have a reputation of being honest and putting out what's really happening on our streets. A lot of folks don't like that. Politicians don't like it because you're showing the failure. Their failure, but it's all of our failures, really, to do something about the pain and suffering that's happening and the death on our streets. Nonprofits sometimes don't like it for some of the same reasons. Yeah. But it's the truth. And I don't work for anybody. Well, I do get people call me up, or I used to get people call me up after I do an interview or something and get kind of upset at me. Why are you doing that? Why are you saying that? And I explained to them, I said, listen, I work for one group of people. And I use that word work lightly. It's not work to me. It's volunteer.
It's your hobby.
It's my hobby. It's my
your
passion.
Hobby.
But I explained to him, I said, I do this for one group of people, and it's the homeless people out here. Yeah. And you're not homeless, so I don't work for you. So you can holler at me all you want, but I'm going to be out here. I'm going to be showing what's really going on as best as I can and documenting it, documenting our failure. And I also talk about what is working, and I share success stories and things like that, and people or organizations that are doing good work, and it just is what it is. Yeah. And that's what I'm going to show. That's what hits my lens.
You are definitely a unicorn. I've never met anybody like you. I mean, you're retired now. You're a business owner who the best way I can describe it is a hobby. You picked up helping homeless people as a hobby, but it's also your passion. I mean, you're very passionate about this. How did it start?
Well, kind of the same way I grew my businesses. I'm a ground-up learner. So when I wanted to get involved in a community issue after decades of building my business, I just, obviously, homelessness, 14, 15 years ago when I started doing this, homelessness was very visible. And so I just started going out on the streets and talking to people and getting to know people, finding out from them directly what's going on, what's happening, what is this issue all about, where are you getting help at, or where are you not getting help at? And I just started learning about it and then volunteering for organizations working on it. And then I'm from San Diego, and so I quickly learned that San Diego's not really very cutting edge on this issue, so I needed to expand out and go to some other cities, start going to conferences like the NAEH conference that we're at right now. But I'd also go to very small research conferences. I'd go to the veterans conferences. Really wanted to understand this, and learned about the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development Continuum of Care program, which I could talk about more later if you want, because I think that's
an hour.
I think that's at the root of some of our problems. I learned about the data, and I just really dug in deep. But at the root of it was just helping people.
But I mean, how did it start? I mean, most people like, pick up a hobby like archery or fishing or, all of a sudden, how did homelessness become your passion?
I woke up one day and decided to go out on the street and start talking to people. Now, I did have a brother who had a very serious mental illness. He committed suicide quite a while ago. And I do see him in a lot of faces of these younger folks who have schizophrenia out on our streets. I don't think he was ever homeless. I mean, he might have been out overnight here and there.
But it gave you a new understanding.
But I had the understanding of the mental illness already.
Yeah.
And that didn't bother me or scare me going out and talking to people who exhibited some of those behaviors. And so that might have been part of the motivating factor, but it was just a visible issue, and I wanted to learn about it. And it grew on me pretty quickly, though.
You're pretty well known. I call it sweep hunting. And we did a video following you around Criminalization. But you're out, not every morning, but often. You are out with your camera documenting police and sanitation, is it, in San Diego, doing homeless sweeps. They must love you.
Well, I've had quite a few interesting run-ins, been threatened with arrest many times, had hands put on me by the police and things such as that. But once again, if I go to jail, I don't have work to go to, so it doesn't matter. And I'm just going to be out there doing it no matter what.
Why is it important to go out and document these sweeps? What is the public not seeing? And the public, like your Facebook explodes sometimes, I think most often when they see bicycles being thrown away, right?
Unfortunately, yeah. Because I'm in a unique position that I can go out and do those things. And so I use that power that I have and try to put it to some good.
But what is the public not seeing? I mean, talk about the sweeps in San Diego.
The public doesn't see and talk to the people who are impacted the most by the criminalization of homelessness or the sweeps of encampments and so forth. They don't see what folks are going through and how that perpetuates homelessness, how that is part of what they are complaining about. The public is complaining about, we see encampments everywhere. We see homeless people everywhere. They're in our neighborhoods now. Well, they're in your neighborhoods because the mayor wants to clear out people from downtown. And so when that happens, you see more people in your neighborhood. They don't understand that. Now, more people understand that now because I think I've done a pretty good job of reaching lots of people.
Yeah.
With the videos and with the messaging about why you see this, why you see homelessness being moved around, why you see homelessness continue to grow in places like San Diego. And it's really because there's very few real solutions being implemented and a lot of Band-Aids being deployed. And I try to show that.
You often say it's a whack-a-mole policy.
That's actually a term the police taught me.
The police said that?
Yeah, they taught me that word. They said what they do is whack-a-mole.
So they even know that it doesn't work.
Absolutely.
Politicians keep pushing it because voters don't want to see homeless people, and that's what they can do real quick.
And the police make a lot of money off of this. I mean, in San Diego, there's an entire police division called the Neighborhood Policing Division with officers all the way up to high-ranking officers that oversee that division that do nothing but work on homelessness. And that accounts for a good part of the police budget's overtime every year. And so some of the officers on that division are getting close to retiring, so they like to kind of kick back on that division because it's pretty safe.
And they get the overtime.
And they get tons of overtime, as much as they want.
So let's say it's a Monday, Tuesday in San Diego. You go out around 6 o'clock. You drive around looking for signs. Tell me about that.
So it's not so much anymore because it's changed a little bit of what they're doing in San Diego right now, and they've spread people out a lot more. So it's a lot harder to find what's going on. But prior to that, when there was very large encampments in downtown, and there still are some, I could go out and I would pretty much know where they're going to start, and I would just follow them around, and I'd also be talking and helping people at the same time. And I would just be there to document and to shoot videos and and they don't follow their own policy. So I also try to show where the city isn't even following their own policies, their own written policies about how to do these sweeps. So I just try to document it. And another reason I do this is because my material is used by the media.
Yeah.
So they use it to show the story that they're trying to do and to show that the city, well, look, the city is just throwing people's stuff away.
One thing I've tried to get across to nonprofits and advocates is become media publishers. The people pushing for criminalization and fighting against housing are media publishers. And you're a good example of a one-man media publisher. You know, media is often looking at content on social media, often negative because negative drives traffic. So they'll pick up something from the negative, harmful narratives to post. And we should do more media publishing.
Yeah, and explain the negative impacts of it. And so that the media can see more of a range of what's going on.
So I remember years ago when you first started your hobby, you started getting really involved locally, like with the COC. Mm-hmm. For those that don't know, it's a continuum of care. I remember you took me for pho, and first time we met, and we're talking about this. And you're saying, you know, as a business owner, it's so frustrating because you can't solve homelessness this way. You must have been so much fun at those meetings.
Well, I wasn't a favorite in a lot of those meetings, and I tried to drive some reallocation of funds, which was partially successful, away from underperforming programs. But it's really a broken model that unfortunately is still the main funding and focus at the Department of Housing and Urban Development, called the COC program, which dictates at every region. And you can define your region how you want. In San Diego, it's the entire county is under one umbrella for the Continuum of Care program. But it's this community-based process of trying to allocate these funds and oversee the homeless service system, and it does not work. You'll see it promoted at conferences like this, and in some communities it works better than others, but it is not an effective model, and we will never solve homelessness using the Continuum of Care program.
I don't know if they're specific to the Continuum of Care, but somebody from the stage was announcing, you know, the new competitions for funding. Mm-hmm. And I leaned over to producer Erin and I said, you know, it's the nonprofit Hunger Games. It's crazy. You're all fighting for the same scraps. It's not a system that is built to succeed.
No, it's not strategic. In San Diego, and this is true in many cities, not all, but in many cities, there really is no cohesive plan or strategy to reduce homelessness. I like to say that homelessness is the intersection of all these other issues, right? That people fall through the cracks of, whether it's foster care or the education or healthcare systems, all of these basic needs systems, and then people end up in homelessness. And it's a very small percentage of people actually fall all the way into literal homelessness. But if we can't solve that issue, the issue of this very small percentage of people, we'll never solve these larger issues. I just unfortunately don't have a whole lot of hope because we are nowhere closer to reducing or figuring out how to work on homelessness than we were when I started this. In fact, I think we're further away than when I started working on this 14, 15 years ago.
Is that why you pulled back a little?
Well, yeah, I saw that we just go through these cycles of efforts moving forward. Like when I started this, or during when I started my work and volunteering on this, HUD was changing their focus from shelters to a housing-focused funding. Rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing instead of more of the temporary Band-Aids. And that made a lot of sense. It was very research-driven, evidence-based. A lot of those interventions, the permanent housing interventions, when done right, have a very high success rate. You're just getting a better impact because you're actually moving people more quickly out of homelessness than taking them through the shelter and then transitional housing and then maybe getting into permanent housing at some point. It was kind of move the housing to the front of the line with the services wrapped around it. A lot of people call it housing first. I like to say housing focused. Well, here we are 14, 15 years later, and what are we doing? We're going right back to the shelter first system. Even though there's no evidence to show, in fact, the evidence shows that's not the right way to do it. In fact, the communities that have had success reducing homelessness have not done it using additional shelters.
Shelter focused, and then it was housing focused, and now it's going back to shelter focused. And I won't call out the nonprofit. I live in Los Angeles, so that's where my lens is. That's where I see most of this. And we were shelter, and then it was housing only. And it's both. And Jennifer Loving once said something to me. She said, it is both, but we should invest 20% resources on shelter and 80% on housing, because shelter doesn't end homelessness. Housing does, and you need that transition. The problem is now, at least in Los Angeles, there's a 15% success rate from the tiny shacks or from the bridge shelters to housing because there is no housing.
Yeah, and in San Diego, it's even a worse success rate from moving people in. It's more around 10% of moving people from shelters into housing. And so people are they're either languishing in the shelters for long periods of time, or it's the merry-go-round. They're in a shelter, then they're in the emergency room, they're back on the street, maybe they go to jail for some stupid quality of life thing, and then they're back in the shelter. So this merry-go-round is what we're spending a lot of this additional money on. Another thing that is happening is there's been quite a bit of additional money poured into homelessness. It's had very little impact because in San Diego, it's not like they're using that money to get more people out of homelessness. They're using that money to fund the merry-go-round, which is a black pit that you're just throwing your money into. In San Diego, we took a very dysfunctional system and threw a bunch more money on top of it and just made it even more dysfunctional. San Diego doesn't really even have a system. It is just showing up at the right place at the right time, talking to the right person, and maybe you'll get some help. Most of the time, 9 out of 10 times or so, you're going to be told there's no help for you. But yet we spent a lot of money going out to talk to you to tell you that.
It has been, from my experience, always that way. The one constant in homelessness from all the cities I've traveled is the insane amount of times a homeless person asks for help and gets turned away. Mm-hmm. That's not a functional system.
Yeah. So you've asked, why I've pulled back. Well, I've pulled back for a lot of the reasons that I've just discussed. But what I haven't stopped doing is going out and providing what assistance I can directly to people. And I do that because at least we can help people survive while they're waiting for a possibility of some help at some future point in time. So at least I can help people get their clothes laundered or provide some food or provide rides to the doctor or work.
You're now doing more mutual aid.
Exactly.
And we both changed. Over the last 14 years, our viewpoints continued to align. When there was still hope, and housing, I wasn't a big supporter of mutual aid. And it was just because maybe the faith-based organizations that were doing it to try to convert people. But there was some hope people were going to get into housing, right? A sandwich doesn't end homelessness. And now the chances of somebody getting to housing, even though we're housing more people than we ever have, there's more homeless people than ever before. We can't let them die outside. So whether it's a sleeping bag or a blanket, we need to help them. But now, like in Grants Pass, people are being ticketed or arrested for having a blanket. San Diego had just passed a criminalization law.
A new one, yes. We already had plenty.
Right.
But they did pass I think they call it a safe camping ban or camping ban or something like that.
How's that going?
They don't really use it a whole lot. They didn't really need to. They already had plenty of laws. The primary reason was they wanted the PR around it to show that the politicians were actually doing something.
Yeah.
When they're not, and they continue not to, except to do the whack-a-mole, right, to move the people. Yeah. They primarily wanted to clear out downtown, and they've cleared about 40% or so of the people from the downtown area. Well, now they're just outside of the downtown area, and a lot of folks are on the freeways, in the riverbed, the valleys, the canyons, and so forth. So they clear out one area, but the folks just move to another. And so San Diego's big new strategy, unfortunately, is to put a bunch of tents on a parking lot somewhere and let people sleep there. I guess it's a little bit better because the cops don't come and roust you every morning, but it's still people living in a tent outside in America's so-called finest city, and it's not working. People aren't getting housing at any great clip.
It's the sanctioned tent camp model.
Yep.
And another point we agree on, this is just the step, the criminalization, the sanctioned camps, forced internment camps. There's significant momentum for forced camps.
The progression of where we're going is, in my opinion also, is that we are going toward these forced type of camps, and probably sooner than later. And one of the catalysts for that is going to be the continued failure of our city and counties to provide real solutions. So they're doing interim steps like these camps on parking lots, and so that are somewhat close. In San Diego, they're somewhat close to the city. But when that fails, they're not going to blame themselves. They're not going to say, oh, that was stupid what we did, even though people like myself told them, that's stupid what you're doing. You're not going to solve homelessness like that. They're going to blame something else. And generally, it's the people themselves.
Right. They're going to say they're service resistant.
They're going to make the homeless people the reason instead of actually the victims of the poor system.
It's really services are people resistant.
Right. And then the next step is going to be either the state or the city, the counties, or the federal government, depending upon who gets elected. Could be no matter who gets elected, to be honest. But we're going to move towards some type of FEMA camps that are out in the desert or out away from the cities. And that's definitely where this is all going. And another thing I'd like to say is that the Democrats and Republicans are pretty aligned on criminalizing homelessness. Your so-called progressive Democratic mayor like we have in San Diego isn't. He's just as evil as so-called Republican conservatives on this issue. So
criminalization is a bipartisan movement.
It is now. It is at the moment.
And, that is my concern, that in 6 months or 2 months or 2 years, we may never recover from where this is all headed. I mean, maybe in a couple decades, we'll go back when it gets really bad and they go, whoa, we should have done housing. Maybe in a couple decades, but really concerned that we may not recover support for housing because the push for criminalization is so strong.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope. And, you keep moving people in that direction. And what happens? Next thing you know, you're putting people into freight cars and taking them out to the desert.
I don't know the specifics about this, but isn't there a ranch outside of San Diego?
Well, there's property outside of San Diego that they want to turn into some sort of homeless ranch.
Right. So that's part of this.
Well, that's a business type group, I think, that's pushing that. The mayor actually isn't on board with that. I think the mayor realizes that that's going to be very expensive and pretty unwieldy to have 5,000 people out on a plot of land out in the boonies somewhere. Plus, it doesn't work. We know that doesn't work. It hasn't worked anywhere in the country doing that type of stuff.
Well, let's talk about money because, the politicians, driven by the public, don't want to spend any money solving homelessness. Or they say, oh, you've already spent all this money. Mm-hmm. They kind of ignore, or it's not communicated well, that homelessness is growing. The front door is wide open. There's more people entering into homelessness. And there's something about homeless people, the public blames them. Oh, they're criminal drug addicts. Let's just give them a box. And the system doesn't work. But there's this thinking that we have to not spend money on solving this crisis.
So this is somewhere where I don't disagree with the public as much as I do on other things, because we have wasted so much money and have so little to show for it that I'm not going to vote for more taxes and things for homelessness measures, because I've seen the waste. I've seen that it doesn't actually get spent well. Why would we do it? Why? Because that just builds more distrust with the people that we're trying to get to support this. When we just keep wasting the money and throwing it down the pit without actually housing more people and getting more people the help they need to get out of homelessness.
But wouldn't you say it's the public that's driving this? Because the public wants an immediate response. They want homeless people gone from that sidewalk. And they think, oh, shelters are a solution. So the politicians are just doing what the public is pushing.
So I've never seen the public discourse so bad as is right now. But it hasn't been like this the entire time that I've been working on it. There's been a lot more support from the public, and they have voted in some significant tax increases across the country for homelessness and have very little to show for it.
Right.
So unfortunately, I think we're to blame for some of the public losing faith and moving in that direction. Now, I don't think it's right. No matter how poorly we've done as a homeless service system, I don't think it's right for the public to want people to just disappear no matter what. Because these are human beings. These are our brothers, sisters, grandmothers, fathers, mothers, you name it, right? And there's a growing amount of people out there who are very elderly.
Right.
But unfortunately, I think we're to blame for part of this going in the direction it is, and we're going to have to change how we're doing and working on this if we want the public to change.
I've been asked to speak about messaging housing first, and the first slide I put up is of a friend of mine who went into a housing unit, and she sat there for a year and nobody visited. And I say the first thing we have to do is fix housing first. You saw the Finland model, where they have a culture of wanting to make it better. We don't do that. So the first thing we have to do to win the public back, I mean, all the messaging in the world will not help message housing first unless we're able to scale it. And I know that's tricky because you got to have the support to scale it or whatever, but we have to fix what's not working.
Well, I think we also have to do a better job explaining what housing first means. To me,
we've never done it.
Well, to me, housing first simply means that you take somebody who is without housing and you get them into housing as quick as possible. But that's different depending upon who the person is and what they want. Some people want to go into treatment programs or sober living programs or different things like that. People who have substance use issues. Other people like shared housing. They want to be around other people. Other people want their own little space. Some people need very little services or none. Other people need a wide array of services, which should be provided in permanent supportive housing. Now, oftentimes I think you say housing first and you think permanent supportive housing, right? Yeah. And that's an intervention of housing first. Yeah. But it's not the entire housing first system. And so I think we've just done a very bad job explaining that really, when I say housing first, I just mean, hey, we need to focus on getting that person into housing with the fewest hoops in between. Yeah. Let's try to make it as quick as possible depending upon what that person wants and needs.
We have been just horrible at messaging housing first. And like in Los Angeles with HHH and H, you know, it was messaged to the public, we're solving homelessness. This is going to solve homelessness. And you can argue that, okay, here the 10,000 units are actually being built, but they see more encampments. And so they naturally detach from that. They distrust. We created the distrust.
Well, this is one of the reasons you see the politicians have to always have something in the fire, the next thing that's going to solve homelessness. So recently, the governor pushed Care Court. I always said that Care Court's going to help more people that are actually in housing than it is going to help more homeless people, because you have to be able to find the person over and over in order to get them enrolled in Care Court and everything else. Where if you're in housing and you have family, and pretty quickly, the governor and mayors like ours in San Diego came out and said, oh, no, we didn't mean this Care Court was going to solve anything. It's just a little tool, right? Well, they sold it that it was going to solve anything, but they quickly changed their minds. And that's, you're going to see that with Prop 1 that looks like it's going to pass.
Same thing. It's all politics.
It's all politics, and it's meant to fool the public. Yeah. It's meant to fool the public like they're doing something. And really all they're doing is spinning their wheels on new bureaucracies, basically shifting the deck chairs on the Titanic, right? They are not going to stop the ship from sinking. It is sinking, and they refuse to accept it because they are politicians and they are over here looking at what their next career move is, not fixing anything. And it's disgusting. Yeah. It's absolutely disgusting what many of our politicians have become, like a mayor of San Diego who's totally just abandoned people in need, not just homeless people in need, but many others in our community, just for his political ambitions. It's absolutely disgusting.
What people don't understand about care court, there's not enough treatment for the people that voluntarily, that want to go into treatment. Yeah. And it's just madness. What I read about Prop 1 is all it does is give the state more control, and the state can take a bigger percentage, and there's less control and decision making at the county level.
Well, and it's going to take money from programs over here that are currently being funded with those dollars and moving them over here, minus all of the interest that has to be paid on the bond. There actually is going to end up being less money for mental health, and there's going to be people who are being served now by those dollars who won't be served over here. It's a shell game. It's a shell game. There's no new money. It's just a shell game to make it look like they're doing something.
Yesterday, I get this text from you, and it just says, we're not going to solve homelessness like this. I don't know what session you were in. I don't need to know what session you were in. You're just making that statement. So what do we fix? What is wrong? I mean, you've been talking about what is wrong.
So first of all, I'd like to say that there's a lot of people who are passionately working on this, doing the best that they can. And I applaud all of those folks. So any of my comments aren't meant to disparage a lot of people who are working hard. Even if the programs they're working on are dysfunctional, they're out there trying to help people, right? And that should be applauded. And many of them know it too, right? They're working within a broken system.
I think everybody knows that not everybody verbalizes it.
Right.
Not everybody's a retired businessman. You know, like for me, I run a nonprofit. If I open my mouth, which I do, and that's why we don't get funding that we need, because, you know, you said something that people don't like, right? But you don't have those repercussions.
Correct. So I've been really involved in the COC process in the past, and I've seen how much time and effort it takes to get these scraps from the federal government that are then basically thrown up in the community and see who catches them, right? All the nonprofits. It's like you said, the Hunger Games, right?
Right, the nonprofit Hunger Games.
You got to eliminate that. This community process of giving out these funds from HUD is just, it's nonsense. You have to get the money into the community in a much more streamlined fashion. There has to be a strategy, and I think this is where the federal government has to prescribe a much more specific strategy that these funds are going to be used for. It's like in California, the counties are the behavioral health providers and health service providers for the entire community. So it probably makes the most sense to have the counties more involved in this process. We have to have some leadership. Either that, or another thing that I think might be a good idea is let the healthcare system, with its faults also, don't get me wrong, but they're very data driven. They track everything that happens, and my health record, no matter what hospital or whatever I go to in San Diego, they share that. They can pull up and see. And I have issues.
Right.
So I want them to be able to know. I don't want to have to tell them everything that's wrong with me. And so maybe this needs to be embedded in the healthcare system. So I would explore all of those types of things in order to get the funding and the strategy into the communities in a much more strategic way.
I've been saying this for a long time, and I was at the emergency room this week. You know, it's still about money. Health insurance. It's still about data. They want your data, but they take care of you, whatever your need is. You know, I was in seeing a doctor relatively quickly, right? Where here, you know, a homeless person says to an outreach worker, hey, can you help me? And the outreach worker goes, are you Hispanic? Do you have AIDS? They start checking off the list. And, oh, well, we'll put you on a list. Maybe, and, you know, the person doesn't get helped. The system, from what I see, is being driven by that data, the funding, because there's contracts that say you can only help that person who has AIDS or help Hispanics. I mean, I was talking about it earlier. I worked for a nonprofit that was trying to keep the doors open. So they got a contract to help solve veterans' homelessness. And there was no homeless veterans in the city. So they put an ad in the paper. Are you a homeless veteran? Please contact us. I mean, it's crazy, right?
Yep.
The other thing is we did a project with the California Healthcare Foundation and the Street Medicine Institute. And we followed 4 street medicine teams out around California, rural and inner city. And I came away from that. They're so much better at outreach because usually an outreach worker goes out, and there's wonderful outreach workers. Like you said, there's wonderful people. I've never met anybody doing this for the wrong reasons. The street medicine people, they would be able to help with wound care or other needs like incontinence. And they also were better able to explain why that person needed housing into the system so a housing unit would actually open up. Where the outreach worker who doesn't have that medical background is just checking the boxes, where the street medic or the RN that's out on the street can say, hey, this woman has such and such and such, and she's very vulnerable, and we need to get her inside. It's more money to pay for street medics to go out on the street, but I think you would have better outcomes.
Yeah, we need to flip the system on its head, right? We need to actually, instead of checking off the boxes, we need to say, what do you need? Well, let's take a look at you. Let's talk to you. Oh, you need this, and this. Well, we can do all those things. We don't do it all right here, but we're going to coordinate with all the different people who need to be involved in your care. And that's much like when you go to the hospital, you might need an x-ray. They might not do it right there in the doctor's office, but the next building over they do. I'd be dead if our healthcare system worked like our homelessness system. Even I'd be dead.
Right. We probably all would be.
Yeah.
When I was an outreach worker, I would often wonder, why are we getting paid? Because we had nothing to offer people. Maybe a granola bar, or they would buy water if we were going out with media. Otherwise, we really literally had nothing. But we would get called to McDonald's that was complaining that a homeless person went through the garbage to get a cup and was asking for free coffee. And then I realized we're cheaper than the police. So the reason that city was funding the outreach team was that we were the first responders, but it made no sense because when we showed up at McDonald's, we aren't the police. So there's nothing I can do about that homeless person that the store wants removed.
Yeah. And oftentimes the police won't come anyway.
Right. You love the media.
I work with the media a lot. I have a lot of media contacts, and I appreciate what they do.
Yeah.
I think we'd be in a much worse situation as a country if we didn't have media out there shining the light on some of these issues.
But you have some strong opinions about how they're even perpetuating these stories.
Yeah, I don't think they have the time to actually dig into them enough to actually explain it well enough for the public to understand. And that's not just with the homeless stories. I think our media has gotten spread so thin.
That business model is obviously failing just by the layoffs that you're seeing from legacy media. How, in your opinion, because you go out with media a lot, you probably get more media in San Diego than the nonprofit executives. What would be your tips to journalists on covering homeless?
Talk to more homeless people, number one. I mean, that's a lot of, I do less interviews now because I've referred the media to currently homeless or formerly homeless people to do the interviews. And I've always done that, but I'm even doing more and more of that. And just, trying to learn about the issue right there on the streets and taking the time to do that if they can. A lot of times they don't have the time. They're calling me up, an hour or 2 hours before the story. And I think, there's a media outlet in San Diego that puts me on live consistently. And I'd say do more of that. Do more of, hey, bring people into your studio and have a discussion with them and let them say what they want to say.
You on live TV?
Yeah, quite a bit. It's pretty scary.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah.
I know Fox News many years ago had me on after one of the home walks for almost 9 minutes live. And at the time, Garcetti didn't even get 9 minutes.
That is
live.
a lot.
Yeah, that's a lot. It was a slow news day.
5 minutes is good.
Right. It was a slow news day for them to have me. But that's when I realized, wow, I can say the truth. And they probably have some, delay in case I say Lone Ranger shit. or something. What's next for Michael?
I've been working on my health a little bit. I got a little bit out of shape, and so I've been working on that a little bit. And just I'm still involved. Like I say, I'm here at NAEH, on my own dime, just because I want to see what's new, if there is anything new. Not much is really new.
Yeah.
Keep my connections open and just talk to people, see what's going on. So I'm staying involved. I'm not going anywhere. I just do it a little bit less.
Yeah. Did you buy a couch yet?
Nope. I'm a minimalist, so I don't like stuff anymore. I have a very small footprint, and I even just recently got rid of my little small storage unit that I had.
Yeah, you have one chair?
I don't even have that.
Really?
Yeah.
So no table, no chair?
Nope.
Well, how do you hang out and watch TV? Well, you don't have a TV. So a wise man once told me to never acquire more than would fit in a pickup truck.
Yeah.
And I have been penalized for that many times. So I respect a minimalist. It takes a lot of work, but you're a minimalist to the extreme.
Well, I'm still working on it, but I would have extra room in a pickup truck.
I bet you would.
I'm still working on it.
I bet you would.
I've gotten rid of a lot of stuff recently, and I didn't have much to get rid of.
Is there anything that we didn't cover, something you'd like to add?
Oh gosh, Mark, we can talk about this stuff all day long. It's just I can't believe I'm sitting here actually having this conversation and seeing how much time we've wasted as a country on this effort, over this last decade plus. We've had a lot of opportunities to make progress. Some communities have taken advantage of it more than others, and unfortunately, our inability to get our shit together has cost a lot of lives and led to where we are now, which is really taking this punitive approach toward our fellow human beings.
It's really scary.
It's really scary where we're going, and I don't know why people aren't waking up to it. We still have a lot of folks who just go down and stamp their D's on their election thing, or there are people, depending upon which way you lean. And got news for you, but these folks aren't doing us any favors. Yeah. There's more and more people out there who can't afford housing, and I think that's probably going to be the next catalyst for change. There's just more and more people who can't afford to live anywhere almost because the rents are too damn high. Right. And housing has been commodified to the ultimate degree at this point, and there's so many people making so much money off of that on Wall Street and so forth, in the entire system that touches housing.
Agreed.
It's going to be hard to unwind that, but I think that's what has to happen is we have to fix the housing issue, and there's a lot of forces that are against that. But I think that's probably going to have to get a lot worse before people just kind of rebel against the system. And
yeah, we've talked about this because the momentum of force camps is so strong. Don't know how to stop it. Maybe there's a rebellion. Who knows? Definitely need a revolution.
Well, I mean, history tells us that you can only let so many people in your country or in your civilization get so bad off before that's what happens, right? And so we're probably on some sort of path to that.
So how I say it, when Reagan cut $15 billion, which is probably $35 billion in today's money, up until then, there was no term chronic homeless. I mean, National Alliance is 40 years old. CSHs and all these mega nonprofits didn't exist before that moment. So we can look at it and say, there's 40 years of homelessness. I mean, almost overnight, chronic homelessness was born. And it was back then, of course, 3 hots and a cot, let's do shelters, life changes. And then the movement has gone to housing, and now kind of all of a mess, right?
Yeah.
We're dancing madly backwards. And, for me, I see how it evolved, because back when it started, it made sense. You have 100 homeless men, right? Because it was mostly men back then. Now we see a significant increase in homeless families. Back then, you have 100 homeless men. Well, all you need is 100 shelter beds, and you've solved homelessness. So then now with housing, you have 100 homeless people. You only need 100 apartments, and you've solved homelessness. So we've been treating the system on that model, which I call the numbers game. And it's evolved from that. Here we are, and we're still playing the numbers game without really focusing on the systemic crises that cause homelessness.
Yeah, that doesn't look like that's changing anytime soon.
Yeah.
In fact, it's just more people being dumped into the situation, into homelessness.
If you had 3 wishes, what would they be?
Oh, a more just society, of course, for people to actually care about their neighbors and for there to be some kind of a community effort to take care of each other, because that's what it comes down to, right? Actually caring enough about your neighbors, or whether they're on the street or in housing, that you want what's best for the community instead of just what's best for yourself.
Thanks for spending time.
Of course.